Back to school season is often when families first begin recognizing signs of sensory challenges in their children. New classrooms, unfamiliar teachers, louder environments, changing schedules, different clothing, busy hallways, and daily transitions can place much greater demands on a child's nervous system than the summer months could. And then suddenly, a child who seemed to manage fairly well throughout the summer becomes easily overwhelmed. They may struggle to get dressed in the morning. They may resist certain clothes. They may panic when it's time to leave the house, cover their ears at school, become exhausted after class, or just completely melt down once they get home. And parents may notice that their child has difficulty transitioning into a new environment, staying calm throughout the school day, or even just regulating their emotions when plans change last minute all of a sudden. And these struggles are not limited to just a few families here and there. In fact, sensory processing challenges are estimated to affect approximately 1 in 6 children today in the United States. And for these children, everyday sensory information can feel confusing. It can feel uncomfortable, unpredictable, or just completely overwhelming. Their nervous system may struggle to properly filter and regulate normal input, leaving them in a near constant state of sensory overload. And unfortunately, parents are often told it's just a phase, let's wait and see, or the dreaded they'll grow out of it, right? But when a child is consistently struggling with sensory processing, early recognition and intervention can be incredibly important. And those interventions should do far more than simply create workarounds. Accommodations and sensory strategies can be helpful, absolutely helpful. They may make daily life easier and give a child tools to manage challenging environments. They're great. But parents also deserve the opportunity to look deeper and ask why their child's nervous system is having such a difficult time processing ordinary information in the first place. So today we're going to talk about the most common signs of sensory processing disorder, explain then what may be happening within the brain and the nervous system, and discuss why these patterns can be so difficult to identify throughout traditional testing. Sensory processing disorder, often shortened to SPD, affects a significant number of children, and the number of families recognizing these challenges continues to rise on the daily. Despite how common sensory struggles are, they are still frequently overlooked and misunderstood. Sensory processing disorder can occur alongside autism spectrum disorder, alongside ADHD or anxiety and other developmental or neurological challenges. However, SPD and ASD are not the same condition. A child may have significant sensory difficulties without having autism. Some children with sensory challenges demonstrate completely age-appropriate skills in language, in academics, or social development, while experiencing pronounced difficulties with sound, touch, movement, clothing, food, or emotional regulation. That difference can make sensory challenges especially confusing for parents. And a child may communicate well. They may perform strongly in school and appear comfortable in some environments, but completely fall apart in others. The first step is understanding what sensory challenges may actually look like. And one of the most common signs is oversensitivity to touch, to clothing, to sound, smell, light, or food. A child may become extremely uncomfortable with certain textures. They may avoid being touched, pull away from hugs, or become distressed when someone brushes against them unexpectedly. They may complain that clothing feels too tight, too scratchy, too heavy, or simply wrong. They don't like the scratchy pants, the ones with the tags or the seams. Socks, tags, waistbands, buttons, collars, or certain fabrics may cause intense discomfort. Getting dressed may turn into a daily battle, not because the child is trying to be difficult, but because their nervous system is interpreting those sensations as far more intense or threatening than somebody else's would. A child may also cover their ears in response to sounds that seem normal to everybody else around them. They may fear vacuum cleaners, hand dryers, blenders, sirens, alarms, the loud toilets at the mall, school bells, crowded cafeterias, or loud classrooms. They may notice smells that other people barely register and become nauseated or distressed by perfumes, by cleaning products, foods, or public bathrooms. Bright lights, flashing screens, fluorescent classrooms, or visually busy environments may also become overwhelming. Trying new foods can be especially challenging because eating involves several sensory systems all at once. A child has to tolerate the appearance, the smell, the temperature, the texture, and the taste of the food, along with the physical sensations of chewing and swallowing. And then they also had to put it in their mouth. They had to touch it twice. For a sensory sensitive child, trying one new food can feel like a major neurological demand. Some children, in fact, respond to sensory challenges by seeking more input. These children may constantly touch objects, rub different textures, chew on clothing, crash into furniture, spin, jump, climb, or seek strong tactile sensations. They may love rough play, wrestle frequently, push against people or objects, or seem unable to keep their hands to themselves. Sound familiar yet? This does not always mean that they are being aggressive or intentionally disruptive. Their nervous system may be actively searching for stronger sensory information to help them better understand where their body is and feel more organized and in control in their own system. Other children do the opposite and avoid sensory input altogether. They may avoid activities involving physical contact, refuse hugs, or become distressed by haircuts, nail trimming, brushing teeth, baths, showers, or having their face washed, right? They may avoid playgrounds, sports, messy crafts, sand, grass, finger paint, or any activity that feels unpredictable to their body. Fine motor challenges can also be part of the picture. A child may struggle with buttoning clothing, tying shoes, using utensils, holding a pencil, cutting with scissors, coloring, or even just writing. Tasks that appear simple may require far more concentration, coordination, and neurological effort for that child. Gross motor skills may also be affected. The child may struggle with running, jumping, climbing stairs, catching a ball, riding a bicycle, or participating in sports. They may avoid physical activities because those movements feel difficult, uncomfortable, or unsafe to them. Balance and coordination then can also be common issues. The child may trip frequently, they may fall often, appear clumsy, or have difficulty navigating uneven surfaces. They may struggle to coordinate both sides of the body or feel unsure during activities that require balance. Poor body awareness, then, sometimes called proprioceptive difficulty, can cause a child to struggle with knowing where their body is at in space. They may bump into walls, furniture, objects, siblings, or classmates. They may use too much force when writing, hugging, closing a door, or playing with another child because they cannot accurately judge how much pressure they are using. Crowded environments can be another major trigger. Malls, school hallways, parks, parties, assemblies, sporting events, restaurants, and family gatherings can flood the nervous system with sound, movement, touch, visual information, smells, and social expectations all at once, completely overwhelming the child. Then the child may become anxious, shut down, run away. They may cling to a parent or have a complete meltdown. Transitions between activities can also be extremely difficult. The child may become anxious or emotionally overwhelmed when moving from one task to another, leaving a preferred activity, entering a new environment, or dealing with an unexpected change in plans. Turning off a screen, leaving the park, getting into the car, switching classrooms, or beginning bedtime may lead to intense resistance. Emotional outbursts are another common sign as well. A child may have frequent tantrums or meltdowns in response to sensory overload, frustration, or demands that exceed their nervous system's capacity. The behavior then may appear completely out of proportion to what just happened, but the trigger parents see is often only the final stressor in a nervous system that has been accumulating sensory input throughout the entire day. Many children also struggle with self-calming. Once upset, they may have difficulty settling themselves without external support. They may need movement, pressure, quiet, isolation, a parent's physical presence, or a significant amount of time before they can return to a regulated state. Some children, in fact, appear excessively active, while others appear unusually inactive or just lethargic. Their activity level may depend on the kind of sensory input that they seek or avoid. A sensory-seeking child may be constantly moving, climbing, jumping, talking, or touching everything around them. A sensory-avoidant child may withdraw, sit very still, avoid participating, or seem exhausted because processing their environment requires so much effort. Sleep challenges may also be connected to sensory sensitivity. A child may have difficulty falling asleep because the sheets feel uncomfortable, the room sounds too loud, the pajamas just feel wrong, there's a tag or a seam, or their nervous system cannot shift out of an alert state. They may wake frequently or struggle to settle after waking. Attention can also be affected. A child may have difficulty focusing because their brain is constantly being distracted by sensory stimuli. They may hear the humming lights, feel the tag in their shirt, notice every conversation in the room next door, smell someone's lunch, and feel the chair underneath them, all while being expected to sit and listen to a teacher. What looks like poor attention span may sometimes be a brain that is unable to filter irrelevant sensory input. Repetitive behaviors may also be present. A child may rock, spin, flap, tap, pace, hum, repeat certain motions, or engage in other repetitive actions to self-soothe and manage incoming sensory information. These behaviors may help the nervous system create predictable input in an environment that otherwise feels chaotic. When we step back and look at the entire list, it becomes clear that sensory processing disorder is not simply a child being picky, dramatic, stubborn, clumsy, or even just badly behaved. It involves the way that the brain and the nervous system receive, interpret, organize, and respond to sensory information. To understand that more clearly, it helps to break sensory processing into three main parts. First, sensory input has to come into the nervous system. Sensory nerves collect information from both the child's external environment and their internal environment, their body. External sensory information includes what the child sees, hears, smells, tastes, and touches. It also includes information related to movement, balance, body position, pressure, temperature, and the child's relationship to the space around them. Internal sensory information then includes signals such as hunger, fullness, thirst, also temperature, different temperatures, pain, heart rate, breathing, the need to use the bathroom, and other sensations coming from inside the body. That sensory information travels through sensory nerve pathways and through sensory portions of the spinal cord toward the brain and central nervous system. That is the input stage. And then the second stage is processing and interpreting that information. Once the sensory information reaches the brain and the central nervous system, the brain has to determine what the information means. It has to decide what is important, what requires attention, and what requires a response. And at that same time, it has to decide which information is not important and should just be filtered out or essentially ignored altogether. For example, most people can sit in a classroom and eventually stop noticing the feeling of their clothing, the sound of the heating system, the light coming through the window, or the pressure of the chair underneath them. The brain recognizes that those sensations are not threatening and do not require constant attention. A well-regulated system filters that information out so that the child can focus on the teacher, complete an assignment, and participate in the classroom. The third stage is the output or the response then of the sensory information. After the brain receives and interprets the information, it sends actions or neurological impulses out to different parts of the brain and the body. Those outputs then determine how the child moves, speaks, feels, behaves, and responds to the incoming sensory information. When the entire system is working efficiently, the child can receive input, accurately interpret it, filter out what does not matter, and create an appropriate response. But when the sensory nerve pathways carrying that information into the brain and nervous system are altered or interfered with, the brain may receive distorted, incomplete, or poorly organized information. We sometimes explain this as the nervous system receiving bad information. If the brain is receiving inaccurate or disorganized information, it becomes much harder for it to interpret the situation correctly. That can lead to poor decision making or an inappropriate interpretation of what is happening in their environment around them. Then, because the incoming information and processing were disrupted, the resulting actions and outputs may also appear disrupted or inappropriate. A child may scream when someone touches them lightly. They may run from a loud room. They may hit during a crowded transition. They may refuse clothing that feels unbearable. They may crash into objects because their body is seeking stronger feedback. They may melt down over a small change because their nervous system interprets the change as a much larger threat than it actually is. The main takeaway is that this may involve a neurosensory communication and connection problem. Within neurologically focused chiropractic care, we refer to this pattern as subluxation or nervous system dysregulation. Subluxation describes neurological interference that may disrupt the communication between the brain and the body and affect the way the sensory information is received, processed, and then responded to. Once parents begin understanding subluxation and nervous system dysregulation, they can begin looking beyond the outward behavior and considering the neurological patterns underneath sensory struggles. Instead of asking, why is my child acting this way? We can begin asking, why is their nervous system interpreting and responding to their environment this way? That brings us to another important question. Why are sensory issues, subluxation, and nervous system dysregulation so difficult to identify and make sense of? One challenge is that sensory processing and neurosensory function are not always thoroughly evaluated in a traditional pediatric appointment. A pediatrician may assess growth, they may assess development, general health, hearing, vision, reflexes, and major developmental milestones. Those evaluations are important, but they may not show how efficiently a child's nervous system is filtering sensory information or adapting to everyday stress. A child's routine medical testing may come back normal, even while the child continues to struggle with clothing, with noise, food, crowds, transitions, emotional regulation, with sleep, balance, attention, and body awareness. Another challenge is that sensory processing disorder is not always recognized or understood consistently across healthcare settings. Some providers may recognize significant sensory challenges, while others may dismiss them as behavior, anxiety, immaturity, or just a temporary phase. Movement-based therapies such as physical therapy and occupational therapy can be incredibly valuable. Occupational therapists in particular frequently help children build skills, tolerate sensory experiences, improve motor function, and develop practical strategies for daily life. However, traditional medical testing and movement-based therapies are not generally designed to detect subluxation and nervous system dysregulation through the same neurological framework used in a neurologically focused chiropractic office. That is why a child may progress with coping strategies or accommodations, but still require significant modifications throughout the day. The child may learn how to avoid certain triggers or recover more effectively after becoming overwhelmed, but parents may still feel as though the underlying sensitivity has not changed yet. And again, those supports are valuable. And this is not an either or conversation. The goal is not to take away helpful therapies, accommodations, or sensory strategies. The goal is to add another layer of understanding by evaluating the nervous system that is receiving and processing all of the sensory information in the first place. While the underlying neurological patterns associated with sensory processing challenges may not appear through common medical diagnostic testing, neurological insight scans are designed to identify patterns of nervous system stress, dysregulation, dysfunction, and subluxation. These scans allow parents to see objective information about how their child's nervous system may be functioning, rather than relying only on outward symptoms, behaviors, or a parent's description of the child's struggles. The scans can give us, our doctors, additional clinical information about nervous system regulation and adaptability. They may help us better understand why a child is experiencing frequent tantrums, meltdowns, sensory sensitivities, difficulty transitioning, sleep challenges, or trouble calming themselves. Families who have already spent months or years in occupational therapy, built sensory workarounds into every part of their daily life, modified clothing, avoided certain places, changed routines, packed special foods, or carefully planned every transition, we want you to know that it is understandable to want more answers. You may be grateful for every tool that has helped your child, while also wishing that life could be easier, could be calmer, and less modified for your entire family. And that is where learning more about neurologically focused chiropractic care may be an important next step. This specialized approach to chiropractic care looks at the function of the nervous system and the communication between the brain and the body. At Foundations Chiropractic, our goal is to identify patterns of neurological stress and provide gentle, specific chiropractic adjustments designed specifically to reduce neurological interference and support better nervous system regulation and adaptability customized to your child. As the nervous system becomes more balanced and more resilient, children may have a greater capacity to process sensory input, to regulate emotions, to move through transitions, to sleep, focus, and recover from stressful environments. The goal is not to change who your child is. The goal is to help their nervous system become more adaptable so everyday life does not have to feel so overwhelming. If your child is struggling with sensory challenges and your family is ready to look more deeply at the nervous system, we would love to help. Visit the link in our bio, leave us a comment, or send us a direct message to connect with one of our care advocates. We can answer your questions, explain how our neurological insight scans work, and help you determine the next step for your child and your family.